Hey everyone, Carmen here, digital editor at Ms. with Kalima from Force and the Monument Quilt. Thank you so much for letting me into your fabulous studio. It is so cool here.
It is kind of cool.
I'm
Thank you very
loving
much.
seeing the quilt and yeah, for taking the time.
Of course.
And so I guess I am here in excitement for the upcoming laying out of the quilt on the National Mall later this spring.
Yes.
And I was on the mall, I'm like, was it 2013 when the last time, or maybe one of the first times that it was laying out?
Yeah, when it was in the reflecting pool. I think that was 2013. Yeah, because it was the first years of it. So it was just literally, I think it just spelled out "not alone" in the reflecting pool.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. And I loved it. It was, I mean, it's such an experience to be among the quilts, to sort of just be witnessing the stories and really taking it all in.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's been a while since that.
Yes. So it's been 5 years in the making.
Yeah.
And we're really excited because May 31st through June 2nd, we will have the Monument Quilt on the National Mall for 3 days. And since that 2013 Not Alone situation, we've gathered over 3,000 quilts that are 4x4. So it's 3,000 survivor stories locally, nationally, and internationally of survivors of violence and gender-based violence and sexual violence and domestic violence from all over the country.
Yeah, and it's coming at such a critical time, but at the same time, it's been this evolving project. So what's the inception story of the quilt, and like how has it sort of evolved to where it is now, or where it will be in May?
My goodness.
Just a quick question.
That's a hard one. That is really a hard one because I think that it's really hard to trace origin stories because there's been so many people that have been involved in it, right? So the founders, Hannah Brancato and Rebecca Nagel, founded this particular project. This idea of what if we get survivor stories together and put them into a quilt, what would that be? And then over the years, it has grown. So it's grown with reaching out to different communities, having workshops throughout multiple communities. We've even had the quilt down at the border. We've had the workshops that are specific to different groups that are impacted, people's stories who aren't always at the center of it. So Black women who are survivors of sexual violence, who are survivors of domestic violence, who are criminalized, Native communities whose their entire fight against sexual violence and gender-based violence is complicated by tribal sovereignty, gender nonconforming and transgender individuals who have had several and ongoing violences that are committed against them, stories from male survivors of sexual violence. And we've had workshops with these communities over the last 5 years, and we've had quilt displays with these communities over the last 5 years building up to this. So it's been a lot of work. And it's been a lot of emphasis on making sure that it is 100% survivor-led. That the survivors are the people who are on the leadership team, that the survivors are the people who are telling their stories and not having their stories told for them. So yeah, it's grown since its little reflecting pool situation. It's been fabulous.
Yeah, and what can folks expect during the showcase on the mall? I know there's going to be sort of a policy day, and sort of folks at the display, activist-oriented stuff, and also opportunities for survivors to speak out.
Yeah. So there's definitely the policy day, and we're going to have Melissa Alexander. She's going to be the keynote speaker. We're so excited.
That's amazing.
We did an action for her where we have actual quilts that were made in honor for her, which she was in the middle of her process. So that'll be really great. We're going to have all 3,000 quilt squares laid across the National Mall, and it's going to spell "not alone." And it's also going to say "not alone" in Spanish, which at this moment, for some reason, my brain has blanked, and I apologize. Yay, welcome to Daylight Savings Time. And it's also, while it's on display over these next 3 days, we're going to have different performances, I'm on the intentional spaces team, so we're creating a series of tents that are designed for folks who are visiting the quilt, who are survivors, where they can do healing activities and healing work. So we're going to have different kinds of practitioners bringing healing modalities. There's going to be a story tent where people can tell stories that are those family stories that you kind of half know about our legacies of trauma, but you don't actually have a chance to speak them. You don't know the details. You don't need the details. There's a space for you to place your story. There will be shifting identity-focused tents. I was brought onto the project working on women of color-specific spaces. So there'll be tents that are specific to your particular identity that you're bringing to it. And then, of course, just spaces where throughout the display, people can sit and be and process, because it's a powerful experience. Even if you are not a survivor, if you are an ally, even if these stories aren't yours, they're still your stories. So when we're surrounded by people who are living in their truth that much and putting it on display, it creates a very powerful, and sometimes that can be traumatic, and sometimes that can be triggering too. So we got a lot of work to do over the next over those 3 days, but we're gonna have spaces for survivors to be in their truth, to stand in their truth. There's gonna be performances, there will be art making, there will be installations, there will be speakers, and it will hopefully elevate the conversation that we need to have in this country right now about rape culture.
Yeah, well, and I was gonna say it's all coming to fruition in the middle of wild time when it comes to the law and the different policies around sexual violence, as well as obviously the leadership we're seeing nationally, or I guess lack of leadership around this issue and these issues. And sort of what do you hope is there sort of a policy goal or a change making goal for that policy day?
You know, that is something that I can't quite speak on. Which I apologize. There are policy goals. I know that there's been an ongoing policy work that we've been doing around tribal sovereignty. And I know that there's going to be work that's about that. I know there's some policy goals that are related to people, the disproportionate ways that women and survivors of domestic violence are treated in the criminal justice system, but I don't know if it's tied directly to a bill. I think one of the major things is that our speakers and that particular policy day are going to be laying out, these are the particular issues and institutional and infrastructural problems that we're running into and addressing rape culture. And what can communities themselves locally do? Right? Because we can have a giant ass from the federal government, but we have a giant ass in the federal government. So, no, I'm just being real. So I think one of the most important parts of the policy push are to articulate how locally and federally people can do work on their own, because that's the only way that actual work is going to move forward.
Well, I mean,
related to rape culture and violence.
And it's such a powerful way of showing, throughout the project, this idea, not alone, community-oriented and survivor-led stuff, all just sort of creates a community for survivors and of survivors. What do you think the impact has been, and what are you hoping sort of bringing that community to the president's front door and Congress's front door?
Over the years, we've had debates back and forth about if we're actually going to put it on the National Mall. Because one of the inspirations for laying the quilt out is, of course, the Names Project, right? We pay homage to the Names Project and the power that went along with, there's a crisis here, and we need to pay attention to it. So the stakes became even higher in 2016 when the people came in. The people. I shall not be named. The Falcon. Who shall not be named. But when they came in. So I feel like many of us feel that we're elevating the conversation. Because it's really easy to ignore that rape culture is systemic and infrastructural and built into how society works. So I think the major goal is you are not going to be able to squash this and say, okay, we've got our Harvey Weinstein, so we're good, right? We've got our Me Too's and we're good, right? Just like, no. Here's the plethora. Here are the plethora of stories that you need to know that elevates it and puts it in people's faces so that we can't just say, okay, well, R. Kelly's going to jail, we're good, right? It's like, no, there's an actual thing. So I feel like that is the most important part of having it on such a national stage.
Yes.
Is that you cannot quell it down. You can't squash it into one or two specific high profile things when you have 3,000 stories and a ton of survivors in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that if we keep that kind of pressure on, we can avoid just focusing on what seems to be a high profile moment, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
When the Me Too movement began to heat up in our public discourse, we as a leadership team were having conversations like, oh man, should we get this on the mall faster? Should we do it faster, right? To take advantage of this like bubbling energy. And we're just like, hold on. Rape culture has been around for a really long time. If we're going to do justice by this, we need to keep on doing the grassroots work. We need to get communities locally, nationally, and federally working and telling their stories in their own particular way, and not just jumping on what feels hot.
Yeah.
Just because, yes, it'll elevate the conversation, but after that conversation is over, there's still going to be lives that are impacted every single day. You can walk up the street here in Baltimore, and there's the stroll where transgender and non-gender conforming women are murdered. Like, 8 blocks from where we are. And that's not going to stop just because there's a big conversation that happens once or twice.
Yeah.
Well, makes some sense.
Totally. And I think it's an important extension and expansion of that conversation too, because like you said, it's not, the focus of the project is not to say we have one goal or there's one thing or there's one person.
Right.
It's to say this is a crisis, a national and global crisis, and everyone has a role to play because everyone is impacted, because we all know someone who either is or we are reminded of when we see a square on this quilt or multiple squares on the quilt, right? And it's interesting too, because in 2013 when I first saw it, and that was sort of post Slut Walk and all of this wave of really when I feel like for the first time in a very long time and in a new way, the public discourse finally acknowledged that, this was a widespread thing that was impacting lots of different people.
Right.
And then we had to talk about it. And now it feels like we've come so far. It also feels like we haven't really come that far at all. So it's also about sustaining that conversation. And sort of where do you all have, I know when you're focusing on a huge project, you're like, no, we don't know what comes the next day. But do you all know sort of what direction you'd like to take the project post this display and sort of where you'll be heading next?
Some of the ways that we've been thinking about it. So of course we want to have a large archival process, right? And a digital archive of that experience and a digital archive of how we put the project together. Because this always happens when you're we've been working on this thing for 5 years, right?
Yeah.
And we need to know how we got there, where the middle is, where the end is. So coming up with a really strong digital archive is important. We're also contemplating trying to figure out how parts of the quilt can go back to the community. So be on display at local libraries or in specific schools, in particular like houses, theaters, spaces that people will come and be able to visit it. You know how for the Quilt Squares for the Names Project, they travel. We want the same situation. So we want to be able to make sure that people are always able to interact with it. And of course, we're building a digital archive where people will be able to interact with it as well. Yeah. So,
and I feel like this project has obviously already shaped so many communities and impacted so many communities. How has it sort of impacted you and the folks working on the project as well over the last couple of years?
Wow. I know that I can say for me, being involved in this project has helped to clarify where my work is supposed to be, if that makes any sense. That sitting in spaces of trauma is a part of my ministry as a human. And being able and being honored to be a part of this process has been helpful for me. And it's also been very helpful for me to be able to articulate what it means to be a survivor. That wasn't a phrase I would have ever used for myself 5 years ago. Right?
Yeah.
And I know for many other people, it's allowed them the opportunity to really be able to claim and understand the experiences that they have had. So I think from a personal level, it's been very growthy. On another level, it's also been a really great example of how to do collective work with people. We have gone through a multitude of changes and transformations. People have come, people have gone. And learning sort of the lessons of how to be in community. And for me, how to constantly be in community and approach it from a space of kindness, and how to constantly be in community with my fellow colleagues and folks out in the community, where the goal at the end of every interaction is to leave it full and not to have left diminished, right?
Yeah.
Your job on the planet is not to diminish people or leave an interaction diminished. And I feel like being involved in the Monument Quilt for myself personally, that's been a really helpful process. And I think it's probably something that resonates with other folks who've been involved too.
Awesome. And I also love the interaction between art and activism in the project. And so what unique role do you think a project like this has to play in this sort of, at times, policy-heavy discourse, and also just such a heavy cultural and complex cultural discourse around rape culture?
I think that sometimes, I really feel like art is the glue, and it always is the great communicator. And it's not just about people's stories, it's about bringing people together, you know? It breaks down barriers. You don't have to be a quilter, a master quilter to make a quilt square, right? It allows people to be expressive in ways, to be expressive in a way that doesn't necessarily strip them of the moment, of themselves. You know, because oftentimes, especially around conversations related to domestic violence and gender-based violence and sexual violence, we want people to pour out their stories, right? It's like kind of like torture porn, right? You just really want all of the pathos. And I think that the quilt square gives you that energy of like, oh, I'm getting someone's truth without necessarily having to endlessly mine people's trauma and re-traumatize them to some extent. So I think art is the great communicator, and quilting itself, the role that it plays in especially the lives of women at times and what it's done, how it's brought communities together. I think there's just something really genuine about community building that goes along with art making in a public way.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And so how can everyone find out more about the display on the mall, get involved?
You can visit our first website, upsettingrapeculture.org. Am I correct? .com. Upsettingrapeculture.com. You can follow Force on Facebook for all of our updates. You can also follow Upsetting Rape Culture on our Twitter. And there is also the Monument Quilt website that you can follow as well.
Heck yes. And it's when does the display start? The end of May? Yeah,
it starts May 31st and it ends June 2nd on the National Mall. Come on through.
Yeah, and the event is tagged in the description of the video, and so is Force, so you can find out lots more about them there. And thank you so much. I am very excited. Oh my God, no, thank you for all you're doing. I love this project so much. It's been really amazing watching it grow, and also just being able to bear witness to how powerful it is and how impactful our stories can be and how impactful art can be.
Yeah, most definitely. Always.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.